Tanya sat on the old sofa in her apartment, staring out the window at the rain pouring down. The city outside, usually full of life, felt quiet and still, as if the storm had silenced everything. The soft glow of streetlights reflected on the wet ground below, and the only sound in the room was the hum of the heater. But even that didn't bring her comfort. Her mind was filled with regret and uncertainty as she thought about the mistakes that had brought her here. The mood in the room was heavy, but there was also a small flicker of hope hidden underneath. The weight of her mistakes still felt fresh, but she couldn't stop wondering. Could she overcome them? Though everything outside seemed dark and quiet, there was a part of her that wanted a fresh start, a chance to make things right. Tanya was 28 years old and had moved from Fairfax, Pennsylvania, to Melbourne, chasing her dream of becoming a successful architect. She was determined, hardworking, and always aimed for perfection. She had earned respect at her job at a top architectural firm and was known for being smart and detail-oriented. But underneath her confidence, Tanya was struggling. Her drive to succeed had made her push herself too hard, always expecting perfection from herself. She never gave herself a break and constantly worried she wasn't good enough. When a big project she had worked on fell apart, it hit her hard. She felt like she had failed and now questioned everything about her abilities. Sitting on the couch, Tanya's goal felt simple but overwhelming: to find a way to move past this darkness and rebuild her life and career. But even as she sat there, unsure of where to start, she wondered if it was even possible to begin again. As the story unfolds, Tanya will learn that redemption isn't about fixing everything all at once. It's about taking one small step forward, even when she's unsure of the path ahead. Tanya's world, once filled with endless possibilities, had just come crashing down. It happened in an instant, one phone call that changed everything. The senior partners at her architectural firm had called her into their office, and the moment she stepped inside, she knew something was wrong. The air was thick with tension, the kind of silence that precedes bad news. "Tanya, we need to talk," said James, the lead partner, his voice cold and clipped. He pushed a stack of papers toward her, and the weight of the moment made her stomach tighten. The look on their faces was enough to make her heart sink. She glanced down at the papers, her hands trembling as she read through the report. The project she had been working on for months, a design that had consumed her every thought, had failed. The client wasn't happy with the final results, and now the firm was facing serious consequences. "We've decided to pull the project," James continued. "The feedback we received was too negative to ignore. We're already getting calls from the client about their concerns. You're not being let go, but this will reflect poorly on you. We need to discuss your future here." Tanya's mind went blank. She had poured her heart into this project, working long nights, missing meals, and sacrificing time with her friends and family. And now, in a single moment, everything she had worked for felt like it was slipping through her fingers. The firm's reputation was on the line, and hers was now tied to the failure of this project. She felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, and for the first time in a long while, she wondered if she could handle it. "Do you understand the gravity of this situation?" James's voice snapped her back to reality. Tanya nodded, though inside she was numb. She had always been able to handle pressure, but this felt different. It felt like the end. She tried to keep her emotions in check, but the sting of disappointment was sharp. She had given everything to this project, and now it felt like it had all been for nothing. The fear of failure was overwhelming, and for the first time, she questioned everything about her career and her place in the firm. As she left the meeting, Tanya's mind raced. She walked through the corridors of the office, the sound of her heels echoing in the otherwise quiet space. She was surrounded by colleagues who had once admired her work, but now she couldn't help but feel like a fraud. The thought of returning to her desk was unbearable, so instead, she grabbed her things and left, stepping out into the cold, dreary Melbourne afternoon. Tanya's heart pounded in her chest as she walked aimlessly through the city streets. The weight of failure was a physical presence, pressing down on her with every step. She tried to push away the feelings of self-doubt and fear, but they lingered like an unwelcome shadow. The idea of telling Anthony, the one person who always supported her, was just as daunting. How could she explain to him that everything she had worked for was now falling apart? As she walked, her mind replayed the meeting over and over. The loss of the project wasn't just about her career, it was about her identity. She had defined herself by her work, and now that work had failed. What did that mean for her? Could she even keep going? The path ahead felt uncertain, and for the first time in years, she didn't know what the future held. The stakes were clear. Tanya stood to lose everything she had worked so hard to build, the respect she had earned, her sense of self-worth, and the future she had dreamed of. The failure of the project wasn't just a setback, it was a crossroads. She could either find a way to rise above it, to rebuild and move forward, or she could let this defeat define her, ending her career before it truly began. Tanya had always prided herself on her resilience, but this was different. She was at her lowest point, unsure if she could ever recover. The emotional weight of the situation was crushing, and she didn't know where to turn. But one thing was certain, she couldn't stay in this place forever. Something had to change, but she had no idea where to start. The days following Tanya's meeting with the senior partners were long and filled with a sense of dread. Every corner of the office now felt like a reminder of her failure. She couldn't shake the feeling that people were talking about her behind her back, that whispers followed her wherever she went. The weight of disappointment, both from herself and the firm, pressed on her every step. But instead of retreating into the shadows, she tried to push forward, determined not to let this define her. However, the road to redemption was not going to be easy. Her first challenge came the day after the meeting, when her boss, James, asked her to sit down and discuss what went wrong. He wasn't the only one. The client had called the firm to complain about the project, and now it was up to Tanya to make things right. The pressure was mounting. "I've been going over the feedback," James said as they sat across from each other in his office. His tone was stern, his eyes cold. "You need to take full responsibility for this. We don't tolerate mistakes like this here. You need to fix it. Now." Tanya clenched her jaw, her fingers tightening around the pen she held. She wanted to argue, to explain how much work she put in, but she knew better. James wasn't interested in excuses. He wanted results. "Take a step back," he continued, his eyes narrowing, "and fix this. If you can't, I don't know how much longer we can keep you here." The words hit her like a slap to the face. She had always been proud of her work ethic, but now it felt like everything was crumbling. The fear of losing her job, of being seen as a failure in front of her colleagues, felt suffocating. But she couldn't let herself give up. Not yet. She nodded stiffly. "I'll do what I can," Tanya said, her voice quieter than she wanted it to be. With that, she left the office, her heart racing. The path ahead was unclear, but she had no choice but to try. She immediately dove back into the project, poring over every detail. She worked late into the night, revisiting old designs and ideas that had been dismissed. But the more she tried to fix the problem, the more obstacles she encountered. The feedback from the client was confusing, and the team she had worked with had already moved on to other projects, leaving her to pick up the pieces alone. In the midst of this chaos, Tanya found herself turning to Anthony for support. He had always been there for her, offering encouragement when she needed it most. They had been friends for years, and Tanya trusted him more than anyone. But this time, she wasn't sure how to explain the depths of her failure. "You look exhausted," Anthony said one evening when he found her sitting at her kitchen table, surrounded by papers and sketches. He had come over to check in on her after hearing about the project disaster from their mutual friends. "What's going on? You haven't been yourself lately." Tanya forced a small smile. "Just a rough patch," she said, not wanting to burden him with the full weight of her struggle. But Anthony wasn't buying it. He sat down across from her and took her hand. "Talk to me, Tanya. I'm here. You don't have to go through this alone." For a moment, Tanya hesitated. She wanted to tell him everything, how she felt like she was on the verge of losing everything she had worked for, how each day felt like she was drowning in failure. But instead, she just shook her head. "It's just work. I'll get through it." Anthony didn't press her further, but he made it clear that he would be there whenever she was ready. His support was a small comfort in the midst of the storm. Days turned into weeks, and Tanya continued to face one challenge after another. She reworked the project multiple times, only to receive more negative feedback each time. Her self-doubt grew stronger, and the pressure to fix everything mounted with each passing day. She found herself questioning whether she could keep going, whether she could ever regain the trust of her colleagues or the respect of her firm. Then came her second big challenge. A rival architect, Ethan, who had always been a thorn in her side. Ethan had been with the firm for years and was known for his quick wit and charm. He had a way of swooping in on opportunities and taking credit for work that wasn't his. Tanya had always seen through his facade, but now his presence felt more threatening than ever. One afternoon, Tanya overheard a conversation between James and Ethan in the hallway. Ethan was discussing a new project, one that could potentially take over the client Tanya had failed with. He was positioning himself as the solution to the problem, all the while subtly undermining Tanya's efforts. His words stung, but they also fueled something inside of her. This wasn't just about a failed project anymore. This was about her career and her reputation. Ethan was trying to steal everything she had worked for. The realization hit Tanya like a lightning bolt. She wasn't just fighting for redemption. She was fighting to prove herself, to show that she could overcome the challenges stacked against her. She had to rise above her doubts and fears, not just for her own sake, but to prove that she was capable of more than Ethan and everyone else gave her credit for. But as she faced these external challenges, she also found herself confronting deeper, internal struggles. Every failure, every setback, made her question if she was really cut out for this. The pressure to succeed was overwhelming, and she wondered if she could keep going without breaking. One night, after another round of revisions on the project, Tanya sat in front of her computer, feeling completely drained. She stared at the screen, her mind a blank slate. Just as she was about to give up for the night, a message popped up on her phone. It was from Anthony. "Hey, I know things are tough right now, but you've got this. Just take it one step at a time. You're stronger than you think." Tanya stared at the message for a long moment. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling of calm amidst the storm. For the first time in weeks, she realized something. She wasn't alone. There were people who believed in her, who were cheering her on. Anthony's words weren't a magic fix, but they gave her the strength to keep going. She wasn't done yet. In the days that followed, Tanya started to make real progress. She reached out to a few colleagues for feedback and suggestions, taking them into consideration and learning from her mistakes. Slowly but surely, she began to rebuild the project. The process wasn't easy, and setbacks continued to arise. But each time she faced one, she learned something new. She was getting stronger, more resilient with each challenge. But even as she made progress, Ethan continued to lurk in the background, offering sharp remarks and undermining her efforts. It was clear that the rivalry between them was only growing, but Tanya refused to let him break her down. This was her time to prove that she could rise above it all. She was ready to fight for her future, one step at a time. The road ahead was still uncertain, and the obstacles were far from over. But Tanya was no longer the woman who had walked into that meeting weeks ago. She was someone who had learned to face her fears, embrace the challenges, and keep moving forward, no matter how hard it seemed. The stakes had never been higher, but Tanya was more determined than ever to overcome them. The day Tanya had been dreading had finally arrived. The deadline for presenting the revamped project to the client was just hours away, and everything was riding on this moment. The pressure had never felt so intense. She had worked tirelessly over the past weeks, pushing through sleepless nights, emotional exhaustion, and constant self-doubt. The project, once a symbol of her failure, was now her last chance for redemption. Tanya sat at her desk, staring at the final version of her work. It looked perfect, better than she ever thought possible given the circumstances. But still, doubt lingered in the pit of her stomach. Would it be enough? Could she really turn things around? She glanced at the clock. Time was running out. She had to get to the client's office soon, but the fear of another rejection made her hesitate. "Everything okay?" Anthony's voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned to see him standing at her office door. He had been her rock throughout this entire ordeal, offering encouragement when she felt like giving up. But today, even his presence couldn't ease the tight knot of anxiety in her chest. "I don't know," Tanya confessed, her voice shaky. "I've worked so hard, but I'm not sure it's enough. What if they don't like it? What if I fail again?" Anthony walked over to her and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Tanya, you've put your heart and soul into this. You've already proven that you're capable of more than they gave you credit for. Just remember, this isn't just about the project. It's about showing them who you are, about what you can do. You've got this." His words were comforting, but the weight of the upcoming meeting still hung heavy on her. She nodded, trying to push down the fear. She couldn't afford to let this chance slip away. With one final glance at her work, she grabbed her bag and headed out the door, Anthony's words echoing in her mind. The client's office was sleek and intimidating, everything about it designed to remind you of their power. Tanya walked in, her steps measured but unsure. The partners at her firm were already there, standing around a conference table, their faces tight with anticipation. Ethan was there too, his smile sharp and calculating as always. "All right, Tanya," James said, his voice low. "It's time." Tanya swallowed hard, trying to calm the storm raging inside her. She set the presentation in front of the client, taking a deep breath before she began her pitch. Her hands shook slightly as she clicked through the slides, but she kept her focus, determined to make every word count. She spoke with conviction, detailing every change she had made, every improvement. She explained how she had reworked the design to meet the client's original vision while maintaining her own artistic integrity. As she spoke, she could feel Ethan's eyes on her, his cold gaze watching her every move, waiting for her to falter. She finished her presentation, holding her breath as she awaited the client's response. The room fell silent, and the tension was unbearable. Then, finally, the head of the client's team, a sharp woman named Clara, spoke up. "This is impressive," Clara said slowly, her voice carefully measured. "You've certainly put in a lot of work, but it still doesn't quite meet our expectations. I'm sorry, but I don't think we're ready to move forward." Tanya's heart dropped. She had expected criticism, but not this. She had given everything to this project, and still it wasn't enough. The sting of failure was almost physical, but she couldn't give up. Not now. Not when she had come so far. Before she could respond, Ethan spoke up, his voice smooth and self-assured. "I think I can help," he said, sliding his chair forward. "I've been reviewing the project, and I believe I can offer a solution. I'm confident we can take this in a direction that better suits your needs." Tanya felt the blood rush to her face. He was trying to swoop in, to take credit for something she had worked so hard to fix. The insult was too much to bear. She could feel her hands clench into fists at her sides. "No," she said sharply, her voice firm. "This is my project. I've worked day and night to fix it. If it's not enough, then that's on me, not anyone else." The words left her mouth before she could stop them, and the room went still. Her colleagues were staring at her, surprised by her outburst. Ethan's eyes narrowed, but Tanya stood her ground. This was her moment, the turning point she needed. She wasn't going to let Ethan or anyone else take this from her. She turned back to Clara and the client's team, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "I know it's not perfect. I know I've made mistakes, but I've learned from them. This project, this design, it's mine. I'm asking you to trust me just one more time." The silence stretched on, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Then Clara exchanged a glance with the other client members. "All right," she said, finally breaking the tension. "We'll give you one more chance. Revise it and bring it back to us. But we need results." Tanya's heart raced, but this time it was a rush of victory, not fear. She had done it. She had stood up for herself, for her work. The challenge was far from over, but this was a win. A small victory in the fight for her future. The stakes were still high, and the road ahead was uncertain, but Tanya had proven something to herself. She was capable of rising above the fear and doubt. And no matter what happened next, she wouldn't back down. The room was still tense as Tanya gathered her things, but she felt a surge of confidence. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in weeks, she felt like she had a chance. The weight of failure, the fear of what was to come, still loomed over her, but it didn't define her anymore. The real test was ahead, but Tanya was ready. The days after the meeting with the client were a blur. Tanya spent every waking hour revising the project, taking into account every piece of feedback and advice she had gathered. Each revision felt like a fresh start, a new opportunity to prove herself. But this time it wasn't just about fixing the project. It was about proving to herself that she could rise above the challenges and make something meaningful out of the mess she had found herself in. Anthony had continued to be her steady presence, offering words of encouragement when she felt like giving up. "You've got this, Tanya," he would remind her, always there with a smile or a comforting touch. His belief in her never wavered, even when she questioned her own abilities. His support kept her grounded, and with each passing day, Tanya found herself growing stronger, more confident in her abilities. She had learned not to shy away from criticism, but to use it as fuel for growth. Finally, after days of sleepless nights, Tanya walked into the client's office again. Her heart pounded as she set the final version of her work in front of them, the same piece that had once seemed like an impossible task. This time, however, she was different. She was no longer the woman who had been unsure of herself. She had faced failure, fought through self-doubt, and come out on the other side stronger. As she began her presentation, the words flowed more naturally than before. She spoke with conviction, not just about the changes she had made to the design, but about the journey it had taken to get here. The challenges, the setbacks, and the moments of doubt had all led to this point. She had given everything to make this project work, and now, more than anything, she wanted to show them who she really was. The room was still as she spoke, the clients listening intently. When she finished, there was a moment of silence, one that felt like an eternity. Tanya's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't falter. She had already done everything she could. This was the culmination of her hard work, her resilience, and her growth. Then Clara spoke. "This is exactly what we were hoping for. The design has come together beautifully, and we can see the effort you've put into it." Tanya's breath caught in her throat. She had done it. She had fixed the project, and more importantly, she had earned their trust. She could feel the weight of the past few weeks lifting off her shoulders, replaced by a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in a long time. James, her boss, gave her a nod of approval, his stern expression softening. "Well done, Tanya. You've proven yourself." Tanya couldn't help but smile, the tension in her chest finally releasing. She had done it. Not just for her career, but for herself. She had faced the challenges, the self-doubt, and the fears, and had come out the other side stronger. As she left the meeting, her phone buzzed with a message from Anthony. "I knew you could do it. Proud of you." Her smile grew wider as she typed a response. "We did it." Later that evening, Tanya sat on her couch, the soft glow of the evening sun filtering through the windows. She had accomplished something she once thought was impossible. The journey had been tough, but it had changed her. She had learned the power of resilience, the importance of pushing through even when things seemed hopeless. And most importantly, she had learned that failure wasn't the end, it was just another step in the journey toward success. As she sat there, reflecting on how far she had come, she realized that this was only the beginning. She wasn't just an architect. She was a woman who had faced her darkest hour and emerged stronger. And no matter what the future held, she was ready to take it on. In the quiet of the evening, with the world outside bustling around her, Tanya felt at peace. She had fought for her future, and she had won.